Historically, the US has been very cautious about providing higher end weapons to Taiwan, trying to balance its political relationship with China and its obligations to Taiwan, which China obviously claims as part of its own territory and has been very open about its plans to, at some point in the future, take over and reconquest. Uh, we have seen a kind of a change in recent years, particularly I would say the last 5 years, as China has become more aggressive and as the tone from Washington towards Beijing has become more aggressive, more of a willingness to give Taiwan higher end capabilities and these more advanced weapons. With this latest package that was approved by state, you saw a focus on missiles. And I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of. These are weapons that would be used potentially by Taiwan against Chinese vessels in an invasion scenario or to protect its airspace, perhaps. This is the kind of long range missile technology that you're seeing China invest in heavily because they see it as the Pacific's very large. We need to be able to keep the US ships out. In turn, it seems Taiwan has finally agreed that's the way to go. In the past, Taiwan has been more focused on land vehicles and things to defend its territory on the island itself. This seems to be the US saying, hey, we're willing to now give you the stuff that could perhaps keep China further out of your territorial waters. How much this changes going forward is we're gonna have to see if this is kind of, tip of the iceberg. We start to see more of these things happening more frequently, or if this is more of a one-off situation. We just won't know for at least a while until we see what comes next and what the follow-on is. Well, we won't know until there's an actual conflict, and hopefully every side can stay calm and avoid that actually happening, because I don't think there's any winners in a big conflict between China and the US. That said, I think when you look at the Chinese capabilities, they've invested very heavily in a number of items. One is submarines and naval capabilities in the last couple of years. Another is nuclear power. In both those cases, the message is clear. They're investing in what they think would be able to keep the US out of the territory that they want to claim or are currently claiming. The idea is, essentially, if they can hold the US a threat, they can keep the US farther out. It means they would have more free reign in the area around there, including specifically Taiwan and perhaps the territorial waters of Japan and South Korea if they decide to look in that direction. These are smart investments from China. When you talk to people in the US, they say China has spent the last 20 years when the US was focused in Afghanistan and Iraq, studying the US capabilities and saying, what would we need if we were going to have to go to war with the US to protect a certain amount of territory that we want to claim? And they've done that. They've invested in missiles, they've invested in ships, and they've invested in their nuclear capabilities, which is the ultimate trump card, if you will, in terms of dealing with the US. So what would a fight look like? Well, we don't know for sure. There have been a number of war games that have happened recently, as you expect. There was one from a DC think tank in the last couple months, which said essentially the US would prevail in a battle, all-out battle around Taiwan against China, but it would be extremely costly. It would essentially cripple America's ability to do anything else militarily around the world. And it would cost hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. Again, hopefully both sides know that and decide that a conflict isn't worth it. If it comes to it, though, I think you'd see militaries that are fairly evenly matched, though I'd say the US currently has an edge. AUKUS is just about a year old as we talk. I would expect that you will see some announcements in the next couple of days or weeks, kind of marking that 1-year anniversary of the announcement. It's worth noting this came from really a big surprise. Those of us who cover the defense world, the national security world, had no idea this alliance was coming until it was announced, which is extremely rare in Washington. Most things leak about months or weeks earlier. So, there is a strategic thought behind this. And yes, it is very much an alliance that is geared towards countering China in the Pacific. They won't necessarily say that on paper. That's not the official statement. Officially, this is just strengthening ties between three partners who are longstanding partners and helping Australia receive nuclear power submarines, which is not something they've ever had before. But it's not easy. It's not hard to read between the lines and understand that this is specifically about countering Chinese power. Relations between China and Australia were very tight, really, until the last couple of years, when there became a growing sense that China has overreached with its demands of Australia. And we've seen the polls in Australia change dramatically about their view of China, and is now very negative, where even just 5 years ago, it was actually pretty positive. Some of that's the result of COVID, but some of it's also just a result of Chinese statements about the territory they're claiming, about the role that they want us to play in the Pacific and what role they believe Australia should be playing, which is to say a very small role that's subservient to them. I think as a result, the US looked at this and said, okay, we have a chance to strengthen our ties with Australia in a way that would counter China, put a potential threat to China in Australia with the nuclear submarines. Well, let's jump on this and make it happen. This is another thing. It's going to be years before we see the actual full impact of this, certainly in terms of those submarines. That could be 2040 before those are up and running, it seems. But short term, politically, this was definitely a blow to China. And you saw China react accordingly. They've now rushed to push in the Solomon Islands, which is an area that had a lot of connections with Australia in the past. China is really moving in strongly there. Some of the other small Pacific islands, China is trying to strengthen their ties and claims to as a result of the US strengthening its relationships with Australia through AUKUS.